Okay, let's unpack this. Um, have you ever been sitting in your own home, completely alone, doors locked, alarm set, and for absolutely no logical reason, you suddenly feel the hairs on the back of your neck stand up?
Oh, yeah, that deep creeping feeling.
Right. It's that hyper-specific, deeply uncomfortable sensation that you're being watched, even when, as a matter of empirical fact, that you are not.
And it's impossible to shake.
Exactly. Well, that is the physical manifestation of liminal dread. Today, we are taking a deep dive into a really fascinating critical breakdown of the film Backrooms.
Which is just a brilliant piece of work.
It really is. Our mission today is to figure out exactly how it weaponizes that exact neurological glitch for its entire runtime. And we're doing it entirely without spoilers, so you don't have to worry if you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, that's crucial. We're focusing on the psychology of it.
Right. We are looking at a masterclass in psychological manipulation that turns the most mundane environments imaginable into just a relentless, creeping nightmare.
You know, the defining triumph of this film, and really the core of the analysis we are examining today, rests on a very specific psychological distinction.
The haunting versus frightening thing.
Exactly. There is a vast biological chasm between a film that merely frightens you and a film that haunts you. Most modern horror operates on fright, which is it's essentially an amygdala hijack.
Like a jump scare.
Right. It relies on the loud interruption. You are walking down a dark cinematic hallway, the orchestral score drops into total silence, and then
Bam! Monster through the door.
yeah, a monster bursts through a door accompanied by a deafening sound cue. That triggers an acute stress response. Adrenaline just floods your system, your heart rate spikes, you jump in your seat.
I mean, I always spill my popcorn when that happens.
We all do. But within seconds, your highly evolved prefrontal cortex steps in, recognizes that you are safe in a theater or, on your couch, and the threat is neutralized.
The brain goes, oh, it's just a movie.
Exactly. The adrenaline dissipates. It is a closed neurological loop. Scare, release, done.
It's kind of a biological parlor trick, really. You get the jolt of energy, but there is no lasting psychological weight to it because your brain just immediately solves the problem.
Right. The threat was identified and deemed fake. But what's fascinating here is how a film that haunts you operates on an entirely different chemical pathway.
So it's not adrenaline?
No, instead of a sudden spike of adrenaline, it initiates a slow, continuous drip of cortisol, the stress hormone.
Oh, wow. So it just wears you down.
It does. It creates a quiet, creeping presence by completely bypassing the conscious, logical brain that reassures you it's just a movie. It feeds your subconscious a puzzle that is missing crucial pieces.
And because you can't solve it, you can't relax.
Precisely. Because your brain cannot close the loop and identify a specific threat to neutralize, it remains in a heightened state of vigilance.
Which is why a film that haunts you lingers long after the screen goes black.
Yeah, it has fundamentally altered your baseline perception of safety. It takes the environments you inhabit every day and subtly, it poisons your trust in them.
Which is the perfect way to look at how Backrooms actually executes this creeping presence. Because to haunt someone on that deep, persistent level, you can't just throw a ghost into a creepy old Victorian mansion.
Yeah, that's too expected.
Right, we know the architectural rules of the haunted house. We expect the floorboards to creak and the lightning to flash.
We braced for it.
Exactly. So to genuinely subvert our psychological defenses, this film zeroes in on the concept of liminality. It fundamentally changes the battlefield from the gothic to the aggressively mundane.
Liminality is the absolute core of this film's architecture. The analysis we're pulling from describes these as the in-between spaces.
Like hallways and stairwells.
Hallways, storage rooms, stairwells, airport terminals at 3 in the morning, generic office corridors after hours.
Places you just pass through.
Right. Psychologists and anthropologists sometimes refer to these as non-places. They are environments engineered entirely for transit or storage.
They exist exclusively to move human beings from point A to point B.
Or to hold inanimate objects. They're never the actual destination.
I was trying to pinpoint the exact feeling of a liminal space for you listening right now.
Yeah.
And the most visceral analogy I can think of is the feeling of being in your elementary school at night.
Oh, that is a perfect example.
Right. If you've ever had to go back to your school for an evening event, you walk down the exact same hallway you walk down every single day at noon. But at 8 o'clock at night, The energy is profoundly wrong.
It feels completely alien.
The lockers look vaguely menacing. The shadows stretch out in ways your brain doesn't recognize. The silence just feels heavy.
Even though it's the exact same physical space.
Exactly. The physical geometry of the space is identical, but your brain is screaming at you that something is fundamentally off. But I want to push you on this a bit. Why? Shouldn't an empty, well-lit building be the safest place possible?
Logically, yes.
I mean, there are no predators, there is no active threat. Why does our biology betray us and trigger sheer terror in an empty corridor?
Well, think about the evolutionary imperative of how human brains process context and spatial awareness. Our brains are incredibly energy-intensive pattern-matching machines. To conserve cognitive calories, we heavily filter our environments.
So we tune things out.
Exactly. When you are in a space functioning perfectly within its intended context, like a busy school hallway or a bustling office, your brain essentially goes into standby mode regarding the environment.
It ignores the architecture and focuses on the people.
Yes, it focuses on the tasks. But when a space is entirely stripped of its intended purpose, when that office corridor has no workers and that stairwell has no foot traffic, our brain loses its contextual anchor.
Oh, so it's suddenly forced to process the architecture itself.
Right. And nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human threat assessment.
If there isn't a normal, mundane reason for me to be standing in this empty, humming hallway, my brain aggressively searches for the abnormal, terrifying reason.
That's the evolutionary glitch. When an environment offers no clear intent or purpose, our primal instincts take over. The subconscious looks at an empty space that should be full of life and deduces, well, the herd has fled.
A predator has cleared the area.
Exactly. The source text makes a profound observation here. It notes that the film doesn't need monsters leaping from the shadows, because it turns these ignored environments into the main event.
The space itself becomes the antagonist.
It really does.
That concept completely shatters how we consume media. I mean, usually the environment is just the stage. It's the static background where the protagonist fights the antagonist.
It's just a container for the action.
Right. You can outrun a guy with a machete. You can hide from a supernatural entity in a closet. But how do you escape the very geometry of the room you were standing in?
You can't.
If the architecture itself is actively hostile, you're already caught.
It inverts the fundamental human tool for survival, which is spatial navigation. When the walls, the angles, and the endless repetitions of doorways are the threat, there is no safe harbor.
You're just trapped.
You are forced to navigate a threat that you are simultaneously contained within. The building isn't hiding the monster. The building is the monster.
Wait, hold on. If the architecture is the antagonist, how does a director actually command that villain?
What do you mean?
Well, we live in a world of TikTok attention spans. We are conditioned for fast cuts, constant sensory overload, immediate stimulation. If you just point a camera at an empty, silent room and hold a shot, you shouldn't terrify a modern audience. You should bore them to tears.
That's a very fair point.
So how does the film weaponize an empty room without the audience just, pulling out their phones?
It pulls it off by leaning into the neurology of sensory deprivation. The analysis points out that while modern horror tries to overwhelm the viewer with noise and chaos, Backrooms uses long, unbroken shots.
And wield silence as a weapon.
Yes, exactly. When you hold a long, unbroken shot of an empty room, you are subjecting the viewer's visual cortex to a mild form of the Ganzfeld effect.
The Ganzfeld effect. That's when you stare at a featureless field of color, like a white wall, or when they put ping pong balls over your eyes, right?
That's the one.
And your brain starts hallucinating because it's starved of input.
Precisely. The visual system is evolutionarily wired to detect motion, contrast, and anomalies. It is always searching for the tiger in the tall grass.
It needs something to look at.
Right. When you starve the visual system of motion, while simultaneously maintaining a context of high psychological anxiety, the brain refuses to accept the lack of data.
Oh, so it just makes data up.
It begins to misinterpret static noise as a signal. The film forces the viewer to sit with the tension and actively scan the frame for anything that might be out of place.
So imagine, for everyone listening, you are staring down a dimly lit, endlessly long stairwell. You watch it for 10 seconds, 20 seconds.
And nothing happens.
Nothing happens. But because the shot refuses to cut away, your brain cannot handle the void. You start seeing shadows shift that absolutely are not shifting.
You see shapes form in the static of the dark corners.
The director is literally handing you the raw materials to build your own bespoke nightmare, and then just quietly stepping out of the room while you terrify yourself.
Which is brilliant. And this raises an important question about audience trust, which the critique highlights beautifully.
Okay, let's hear it.
How often does modern entertainment actually trust us to do the heavy lifting of building the tension in our own minds?
Very rarely.
Right. When you watch a fast-cut, noisy blockbuster, you are a passive receptacle. The movie is doing all the work, spoon-feeding you the fear.
You don't have to think.
But holding that silent, agonizingly long shot demands active participation. It trusts that your own mind, starved of input and desperate for a pattern, will conjure something far more deeply unsettling than anything a team of CGI animators could ever render.
But a long, unbroken shot is only as effective as the visual canvas you were forcing the audience to stare at. And what you're actually looking at in this film is profoundly, intentionally disorienting.
The analog horror aspect.
Yes. The source text calls the visual design a masterclass in analog horror aesthetics. Here's where it gets really interesting, because analog horror is having a massive moment right now.
It's everywhere online.
It is, but it's rarely executed with this level of psychological precision. It blends lo-fi textures with modern cinematography. It is the visual equivalent of finding a forgotten, unmarked VHS tape in a damp basement.
To understand why that specific aesthetic is so effective, we have to look at the uncanny valley of media consumption.
The uncanny valley, right?
Modern digital video is sterile. It is perfect, crisp, and infinite. Analog media like VHS tapes or old film stock is organic. It degrades. It rots.
It has a lifespan.
Exactly. When we see tracking errors, color bleeding, and audio warble, it subconsciously signals to the viewer that the media itself is corrupted.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it implies a loss of memory, a tampering of evidence, or a degradation of reality itself. It takes the concept of nostalgia, which is usually comforting, and poisons it with the inevitability of decay.
It's weaponized nostalgia. The text specifically highlights the, quote, yellowed walls, the buzzing fluorescent lights, the endless repetition of identical rooms.
The yellowed walls are key.
I want to focus on that exact phrase. Yellowed walls. It doesn't say the walls are painted yellow. It says they are yellowed.
Which implies a process.
Yes, it implies age, neglect, and sickness. It's the color of a heavy smoker's teeth or old newspapers left to bake in the sun. It is a jaundiced, unhealthy hue that immediately tells your lizard brain that the environment itself is diseased.
And then you pair that diseased texture with the endless repetition of identical rooms, and you induce a profound state of spatial disorientation.
You just get lost immediately.
The source makes a brilliant analytical point here. It argues that horror doesn't always come from what you see, but from what you can't quite make sense of.
The confusion is the fear.
Exactly. By presenting identical repeating rooms, the film strips away all cardinal directions. You have absolutely no idea if you are walking in a straight line, descending into the earth, or simply walking in infinite circles.
It's architectural snowblindness.
That's a great term for it.
If you are caught in a whiteout blizzard, the lack of defining features makes it impossible for your brain to gauge distance, speed, or direction. You lose your mind because there is nothing to anchor your reality.
You have no reference points.
Right. If you were in a traditional maze, you can put your right hand on the wall, keep walking, and eventually find the exit. But if the maze defies Euclidean geometry, if the rooms repeat in configurations that shouldn't physically fit inside one another, logic breaks down completely.
The environment becomes a psychological trap. You are desperately trying to map the visual data, but the data is contradictory.
It just doesn't compute.
And because you can't make sense of it, that ambiguity becomes a weapon against your own sanity. You are left drowning in terrifying possibilities.
The unknown.
By refusing to give the space a logical blueprint, the film weaponizes ambiguity. It allows your imagination to fill the infinite repeating void with whatever specific personalized fear haunts you the most.
So the visual repetition induces this architectural snowblindness. You completely lose your bearings. But what actually traps you in that space, what makes the nightmare feel physically heavy, is the audio design.
Oh, the sound design is incredible.
If the visuals make you lose your mind, the sound design is what anchors that insanity into your physical body.
The critique gives special praise to the sound design, focusing heavily on the hum of lights, distant echoes, and subtle distortions. It notes that these elements create a sense of presence that is almost physical.
Let's dig into the mechanics of that, because it is a massive departure from how sound is normally used in cinema.
Absolutely.
Usually, a movie score is a set of emotional instructions for the audience. The string section gets frantic and screechy, so you know the killer is right behind the door.
The brass section swells, so you know the hero's about to triumph.
Exactly. The music tells you how to feel. So I have to ask, how does a film build this crushing sense of dread using something as painfully mundane as a continuous, low-frequency hum?
It achieves this by treating sound completely differently than a traditional film. The most striking phrase in this section of the analysis is that the film uses sound, quote, not as decoration, but as architecture.
Not as decoration, but as architecture. Wow.
In standard cinema, sound is the wallpaper. It sets a mood, it highlights an action. In Backrooms, the sound is the load-bearing drywall. It is the concrete foundation.
So the sound builds the room.
The distant echoes and bizarre distortions actively shape the empty space.
It's echolocation for a nightmare.
That's exactly what it is.
Even if there is absolutely nothing on screen but an empty, jaundiced hallway, the soundscape is mapping out a geography of terror in your head.
Right, because when you hear an echo, your brain is subconsciously calculating the acoustic reflections to determine the size and shape of the room you are in.
It's how blind individuals can often sense walls before touching them.
Yes. So when the echoes in the film behave strangely, when a footstep reverberates as if it's in a massive cavern, even though the visual shows a cramped corridor, it creates a terrifying cognitive dissonance.
The eyes and the ears don't match.
It implies a shape to the world that shouldn't exist, hinting at massive, unseen structures lurking just behind the drywall.
And then there is the hum. The text mentions the buzzing fluorescent lights. It's literally one of the most mundane sounds in modern existence.
We hear it everywhere.
We tune it out every single day in grocery stores and offices. But when you isolate that hum, when you amplify it and remove every other piece of ambient audio, it stops being background noise.
It becomes a drill.
Becomes a drill boring directly into your nervous system.
And there's a biological reason for that. That is because low-frequency hums actually trigger a physiological response. We are venturing into the territory of infrasound here.
Infrasound, like frequencies we can't hear.
Right, sound waves that sit at the very edge or just below human hearing capability. Research has shown that sustained exposure to certain low frequencies, particularly around 18 or 19 hertz, can induce measurable spikes in cortisol.
Wait, really? It actually spikes your stress hormones?
It does. It causes physical discomfort, a sense of sorrow, and even mild visual hallucinations as the fluid in the eye vibrates slightly.
That is wild.
So the film is taking the mundane hum of a fluorescent bulb and weaponizing it to physically stress the listener's body. It communicates that the environment is alive in ways we simply do not have the sensory organs to comprehend.
That oppressive, inescapable humming, combined with the sickly yellow repetition, it serves a very specific narrative purpose. It is a war of attrition on the protagonist's defenses, and by extension, your defenses as the viewer.
It wears you down.
It sands you down until you are raw and completely vulnerable. Which is necessary because underneath the visceral dread, this film has a surprisingly deep emotional and thematic core.
It really does. Beneath the immediate terror of the liminal space, the text argues there is an incredible thematic richness exploring isolation, the unreliability of memory, and the desperate human need for meaning in environments that aggressively offer none.
What absolutely blows my mind about this thematic depth is the small detail the critique points out. The protagonist's journey is, quote, largely wordless.
That is so hard to pull off.
As a fan of cinema, I cannot overstate how incredibly difficult it is to convey deep, existential psychological themes without relying on a single monologue. There is no tearful speech to a companion about feeling lost.
There's no voiceover explaining the internal despair.
Nothing. It is purely physical performance against an empty, hostile room.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the analysis posits that this wordless journey serves as a powerful metaphor for navigating spaces designed to erase individuality.
Erase individuality.
Yes, this is where the horror transcends the visceral fear of the dark and taps into pure existential dread.
Let's really pull on that thread. Humans are, at our core, meaning-making machines. We look at random clouds and see faces. We look at a chaotic scattering of stars and invent mythological hunters and bears.
You need narrative.
We have a desperate biological compulsion to find patterns and derive meaning from our surroundings to assure ourselves that we belong there. So, What actually happens to the human psyche when it is trapped in a space that is entirely aggressively devoid of meaning?
An environment with no landmarks, no sunlight.
No history, no purpose.
It triggers an immediate existential crisis. The psychological breakdown isn't just about the fear of a monster hiding around the corner. It is the terror of losing your sense of self.
Because you have nothing to reflect yourself against.
Exactly. Human identity is largely constructed through external context. You define yourself by your relationships, your environment, your career, your impact on the world around you.
The things you interact with.
If all of those external anchors are stripped away, leaving you with nothing but endless beige corridors and a fluorescent hum, well, who are you?
Do you even exist?
Or are you just another piece of office furniture slowly degrading in the dark?
It is a sensory deprivation tank that you can walk around in, designed to dissolve your ego. And looking at it through that lens, you can extrapolate so many different interpretations.
The source notes that the film invites this kind of deep interpretation without ever forcing a single reading upon the viewer.
Could these endless, identical office corridors be a direct commentary on modern corporate life?
The corporate metaphor is a highly compelling interpretation. Think about the transition of the modern workplace over the last few decades.
Oh, absolutely. The cubicle.
The sterile aesthetics of the cubicle farm, the repetitive, specialized tasks that disconnect the worker from the final product, the harsh fluorescent lighting that blurs the line between day and night.
It's all designed to make you efficient, but it strips away your humanity.
The film takes the mundane horror of feeling entirely expendable in a massive, indifferent corporate machine and turns it into a literal physical labyrinth.
You work in a beige cubicle all day. You are entirely isolated despite being surrounded by hundreds of identical desks. You perform tasks that feel completely divorced from tangible reality.
And any display of unique individuality is essentially viewed as a liability to the company's efficiency.
Right. Backrooms is just the spiritual reality of a soul-crushing data entry job made physically manifest.
But the brilliance of the film, as the critique carefully points out, is that it allows for these deep philosophical readings precisely because of how it treats the audience.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it never forces the corporate metaphor. It doesn't force the existential crisis angle either. It respects the viewer enough to let them find their own terrifying meaning in the empty space.
So what does this all mean for the actual experience of sitting down and watching the film? To me, it brings an overwhelming sense of relief.
Relief. How so?
Because we are finally moving away from the villain explaining his entire evil plan trope. I am so exhausted by movies that stop dead in their tracks so a character can look at the camera and deliver a massive exposition named just to make sure the audience understands the lore.
It completely kills the pacing.
It does. This film outright refuses to spoon-feed explanations.
The source material is adamant on this point. It praises the film's deep respect for the intelligence of its audience. Instead of exposition, it reveals its world gradually, relying entirely on visual cues and environmental storytelling.
Which is a fundamental shift in the medium.
It moves the film away from a traditional narrative structure and transforms it into an experience.
The critique says, quote, "You're not just watching someone explore a strange place, you're exploring it with them."
That's a crucial distinction.
Think about the difference between watching a traditional movie and playing an incredibly immersive, lore-heavy video game. In a standard movie, you are a passive spectator. You are sitting safely behind a pane of glass, watching a protagonist deal with a problem.
You're just along for the ride.
But in a video game that utilizes environmental storytelling, where you walk into an abandoned room and have to piece together a tragedy by examining a coffee cup left on a desk, a chair knocked over in a hurry, a specific scuff mark on the linoleum, you become an active investigator.
Your brain is fully engaged.
Backrooms has managed to capture that interactive, investigative magic in a passive cinematic medium.
And that active participation generates a highly specific, very potent type of tension. The author notes that the true fear comes not from knowing what is around the next corner, but from the absolute lack of knowing.
The not knowing is worse.
And crucially, the tension is amplified by having no guarantee that the film will ever neatly resolve your questions.
Denying the audience resolution is terrifying in its own right. We have been so deeply conditioned by a century of Hollywood filmmaking to expect a neat, tidy resolution.
We want the bow tied on top.
We do. The bad guy is defeated, the mystery is solved, the couple kisses, the survivors walk out into the daylight, roll credits. The idea that you might endure this harrowing 90-minute psychological meat grinder and the film might just abruptly end without giving you the answers that violates the unspoken social contract of modern cinema.
It absolutely violates the contract, and that violation is exactly why it haunts you.
Why doesn't that make it haunt you?
We need to look at the psychology of the open loop. It's often referred to as the Zeigarnik effect.
Okay, the Zeigarnik effect.
Yes. The human brain is wired to remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks significantly better than completed ones.
Oh, that makes sense. Like when you leave a puzzle unfinished.
Exactly. When a film ties everything up in a neat bow, it closes the loop. Your brain files it away in a drawer labeled mystery solved, threat neutralized, and you forget about it by the time you reach your car.
But when a film leaves narrative threads dangling,
When it aggressively refuses to explain the mechanics of its own world, your brain cannot file it away. The loop remains open. It becomes a cognitive itch you can never quite scratch.
because the film doesn't give you all the answers, it inevitably leaves you with a hunger to go back and figure out what you missed. You convince yourself, I must have missed a visual clue in the background of that one hallway. Let me watch it again.
Which brings us to the final major point of the critique, the concept of replayability.
Yes. I want to ask you, the listener, a serious question. How often do you actually rewatch a standard horror movie once you already know where all the scares are?
For the vast majority of audiences, the answer is rarely, if ever.
Because once the magician's trick is revealed, the magic evaporates.
If the sole appeal of a piece of media is the shock value of a loud interruption, then knowing exactly what minute and second that interruption occurs renders the film completely inert on a second viewing.
The jump scare simply doesn't work twice.
Yeah.
Your amygdala won't fall for the same trick when it knows the punchline.
But the text argues that Backrooms actively rewards multiple viewings, specifically because it abandons traditional plot structures.
How does that work?
The author describes this dynamic beautifully. Because you are not constrained by tracking a traditional linear plot, you aren't waiting for plot point A to logically lead to plot point B. You are suddenly free to focus your cognitive energy on entirely different aspects of the film.
So you watch it differently the second time.
Yeah, right. On a second viewing, you might ignore the protagonist completely and focus entirely on the visual patterns, trying to map the impossible non-Euclidean geometry of the rooms.
Just looking at the architecture.
And then on a third viewing, you might focus exclusively on the environmental audio, listening for the subtle distortions and the echoes that hint at previous inhabitants.
And on a fourth viewing, you might just let the plot go completely and steep yourself in the thematic threads of isolation and corporate dread. It transforms the movie from a consumable, disposable piece of entertainment into an open-source puzzle.
Calling it an open-source puzzle is the perfect framing. It is a piece of art engineered to spark conversation, deep analysis, and debate.
It wants you to talk about it.
The critique points out that people walk away from this film with wildly different interpretations of what the space actually is and what happened to the protagonist. It emphasizes that this diversity of thought isn't a flaw in the storytelling.
It's not a symptom of a confused director.
Not at all. It is the ultimate appeal of the project.
It is the ultimate water cooler movie, but for internet sleuths and psychology nerds. You watch it, your friend watches it, and you spend 3 hours at a coffee shop fiercely debating whether the buzzing lights represented a sentient architectural trap or just the dying neurons of a comatose brain.
And the beauty is, neither of you is wrong.
Exactly. In a cinematic landscape that is relentlessly crowded with sequels, reboots, remakes, and incredibly formulaic, paint-by-numbers scares, as the text rightly criticizes a film like this, is a minor miracle. It stands out for its bold, unwavering simplicity.
It possesses a remarkable quiet confidence. The confidence to let discomfort simmer rather than forcing it to explode.
That requires immense directorial restraint.
It requires a filmmaker who deeply trusts their own vision, and more importantly, trusts their audience enough to withhold the easy, cheap catharsis of a CGI monster chase.
It really is a masterpiece of restraint and psychological warfare. So to recap our deep dive for you listening at home, we have explored how Backrooms utilizes the evolutionary psychology of liminality to turn the spaces we fundamentally ignore into the spaces that hunt us.
We have seen how it leverages sensory deprivation, silence, and long takes to force your brain to manufacture its own threats.
We've unpacked the uncanny valley of analog aesthetics and how low-frequency sound architecture physically disorients your senses.
And we've seen how it respects your intelligence enough to let you drown in its weaponized ambiguity, offering a profound exploration of existential isolation without ever saying a single word.
Based on the deep insights from this brilliant critique, it is unequivocally worth your time to experience it for yourself.
And before we close out, let's pull this cinematic analysis back into your everyday reality. The text emphasizes that the film explores spaces designed to erase individuality, using the mundane to create the menacing. So, I invite you to conduct a small psychological experiment tomorrow. Look closely at the transit environments you normally filter out. Look at the endless, identically beige cubicles in your office building.
Look at the perfectly parallel, brightly fluorescent lit aisles of your local grocery store when it's empty.
Pay close attention to the sterile, repeating concrete architecture of the parking garage you walk through every single evening to get to your car.
Perhaps the true, lingering horror of Backrooms isn't the science fiction idea that we might accidentally slip through a tear in reality into a terrifying liminal dimension.
No.
It's the realization that we are already building that exact dimension for ourselves, one drywall partition and buzzing fluorescent bulb at a time.
A truly haunting thought to leave on.
Until next time,
Yeah.
keep questioning the spaces around you.